I think fantasy has such a power to help us envision a different way of living, to envision a better world. And it's just cool to have like wizards throwing lightning bolts.
Hi, and welcome back to Quest Markers. On this show, we talk about video games and the people behind them. I'm Marina. I make music and sounds for games. And today, I am so excited to have Tangleworm with us. Tangleworm is the founder of Magnesium Ninja and lead developer on the studio's newest title, NOMIA. NOMIA is a beautiful, story rich tactics roguelike. And today, we'll be talking about NOMIA's development process, making indie game dev sustainable, and why this former graphic novel became a video game.
Oh, shucks. Thank you so much for the intro. Wow, I feel so like a real person now, you know?
Yeah, so excited to have you. Just for the folks watching the recording, this episode will be timestamped, so feel free to jump around. And if you're here with us on Twitch, we do have emote only chat turned on for the duration of the recording, but we'll open it up for Q&A at the end. But I'm so excited for today's conversation. And before we dive in, Tangleworm, how are you staying hydrated? What are you
Well,
drinking?
I have a sort of plain answer. I am drinking water today, but the
Excellent.
I am drinking it out of a mason jar that is the
Ah,
size of my
yes.
head. So hopefully staying hydrated. This used to have pasta sauce in it, and now it has water. So
Excellent. That's the way to do it. I've seen mason jars be sold for unreasonable amounts of money. Whereas I'm like, yeah,
yeah.
give me like jam containers and pasta jars.
Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly,
I
exactly.
think that's great. I use
It's
those.
a perfectly good glass.
I agree. I have coffee, as always. Can't live without it. I also
Nice,
have
nice.
water, not quite the size of my head, but I got some electrolytes in here.
Nice, nice.
I think it's grape flavored today to stay extra
Mm.
hydrated.
That's awesome. I love the concept of grape flavor. Is it like a natural tasting grape flavor or more like an artificial grape tasting
Definitely more
flavor?
of an artificial grape flavor.
I
Um,
respect it.
but that's okay. It is quite sweet, so I don't put a full
Mm,
serving in.
no
But
worries.
yeah,
I only
gotta stay
mentioned it
hydrated.
because oh yeah, sorry, no, sorry. I
No, no.
I I have this strange association with artificial grape because my first exposure to it was in purple Play-Doh when I was a very small child,
Oh
and so my
my.
brain wired it to this is the flavor of purple Play-Doh and not of grape. So I
Oh
can't
no.
have artificial grape without feeling like I'm eating something I'm not supposed to be eating.
I mean, that's fair. It does taste artificial. It does not really taste like grape. I don't think I've ever had anything grape flavored that has tasted like grape besides grapes.
Mm, yeah, that's a strange thing. Anyway, not to immediately derail it with an aside bit.
Uh no, no, no. All good. Before we dive into your game dev journey, could you please tell us a
Mhm.
bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I guess it's mostly game dev related, but like, hi everybody, I'm Tangleworm. Where should I start? I'm a first generation immigrant, Chinese Canadian in here in Vancouver, BC, and I've been doing game dev since about 2011, on and off. I mostly think of myself as a person who draws, and on top of that, I might make the drawings move or do some stuff gameplay mechanics wise. So yeah, I'm currently an artist, animator, designer. Um, Animator very lightly because it takes me a very long time. But yeah, I really enjoy games. I really enjoy just thinking about stories and consuming stories and trying to make my own stories, whatever medium that takes.
I
And I'm
love
happy to be
that.
here.
So excited to have you. Um, I remember when we last spoke, I thought that you were a programmer. So when you said, no, I'm an artist first, I was
Aha.
like, oh, because I've played Nomia and I can only begin to imagine the amount of programming that it takes to build any sort of roguelike
Mm,
game. So yeah, that
mhm.
was really cool to hear. But
Thank you. Thank you.
um, yeah, I love learning about people's paths. So tell us a bit about your path into game development. It sounds like you've been going at it for quite some time.
I have, yeah, on and off. So I actually started in high school with a really good friend of mine, Chris, and like he and a few other friends approached me to just start doing it as a hobby. And at the time, my main contribution was doing the art and like the assets. And you know, I've been drawing since I was a kid and probably for as long as I can remember. I am a programmer in my like day job capacity, but when it comes to games, I think of myself as doing the art first because that's how I got started, and the programming is sort of just there to like support the story and the mechanics that I want to create. And there is indeed a lot of programming that goes into it. I think I've written like over 40,000, 50,000 lines of code for Nomia right now. Um, and I can't promise it's any good, but it's there. And
I can
yeah,
attest that it is.
oh, Thank you. I'm glad. I'm glad it works. I'm glad it works. The mantra I try to follow is don't program for the sake of not being made fun of on the internet. If somebody like decompiles the source code and looks into it, if it works, it works, and we'll learn a lesson for next time if something's a little bit harder to work with. But yeah, my journey has mostly been starting off doing it as a hobby and really finding a lot of enjoyment because I feel like games are just such an inherently joyful thing, like
Mm,
to play and to make. And so it was something that really resonated with me. And then I eventually went to school for engineering and I became a software engineer as in a professional capacity. And but I never really like my heart never really left games, even though I don't work in the games industry currently, I did some internships in it and I tried to stay up to date with games in general and games as a medium. So there was a period of time where I wasn't working on games because of that job, and now I've sort of tried to move back into it and just to experience the joy of creating a game again by doing some mostly solo dev with NOMIA. Yeah.
love that. Um, Tell us, maybe that's a really good segue actually
Mhm.
into tell us a little bit about Nomia.
Yes, well, awesome. Well, the elevator pitch I have, I guess, is Nomia is a roguelike tactics deck builder, where the emphasis is on the story as well. It's a game about you controlling two heroes at the same time. You have both a warrior and a wizard, and they both have two halves of their hand. So one half of their hand is their action cards, which stay the same turn per turn, but have charges and cooldowns, and the other half of their hand is like a gambit deck, sort of like Slay the Spire where it's drawn and shuffled every single turn. So you have a little bit of the reliability and a little bit of the unpredictability. And it's about building both the character and your deck as you take them through a strange and fractured dream world on a quest for, yeah, I guess you'll find out if you play the game.
That's a good ending to the elevator pitch.
Thank you. Thank you.
The thing that really struck me about the game is just how beautiful the art is.
Oh, shucks. Thank you.
It's so stunning. But also, as I mentioned, really impressive to go and make a roguelike that from the outside looking in, I think requires so much thought, especially if it's narrative driven, which yours
Oh,
is. So
thank you. Oh,
yeah, incredible work. And I feel like I've scratched the surface on the game. So
my
yeah,
goodness. Thank you so
I'm
much.
excited to play more of it.
I'm excited
Uh,
to keep developing it.
yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about Nomia's development process since inception up until the release of the early access version.
Yeah, it's kind of been a long journey, but it all started with a seed of I've been sort of immersed in the cultural soup of like science fiction and fantasy and just like imagining different worlds. And I realized I had this sort of tension within myself about really loving fantasy, but also having a lot of frustrations with it, you know. I'll try to capture the nuance here, but like I think fantasy has such a power to help us envision a different way of living, to envision a better world. And it's just cool to have like wizards throwing lightning bolts or just somebody who's just very, very good with a sword or things like that. There's a certain amount of choreography to it that I think is a really good vehicle for aesthetics as well as for like themes. And at the same time, I feel like a lot of the fantasy that we consume in the Western world sort of has some baggage attached to it. I recently rewatched the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy,
Mm,
and it was really good. It's aged really well. And I think the legacy that Tolkien's left behind has some baggage attached to it. Like Lord of the Rings itself, a really cool story about like unlikely heroes and how goodness is a strength, and how like kindness is a strength, but a lot of the works that have descended from it have picked up some strange like undertones of ethno-nationalism. Like here's where all the elves are, here's where all the dwarves are, all of the orcs are evil and you don't have to feel bad about killing them, and like just strange things like that that didn't really resonate with me as much. So I wanted to take that duality and create a world that resonated with me. Like I wanted to imagine what would a world that's centered around an adventuring society look like. Final Fantasy 14 was one of the inspirations as well in terms of like adventures being weaved into the fabric of the world and what they would actually do. What would it be like if there was just a group of people whose job it is to be very cool every day? But to do that in a way that is more thoughtful about violence and more thoughtful about the choreography of that. And as if this wasn't convoluted enough already, I wanted to wrap in my lens as a queer Asian immigrant as well. I wanted to create a world that respects that duality and that embodies that duality. So the love and the frustration, and just thinking from the ground up what that would look like. Um, I've been speaking for a while, but I don't know if this is a good point to start. This is a
No,
good point to checkmate, or should I continue on to the
no,
next little bit?
beautifully, beautifully said.
Thank you,
If there's
thank you.
anything you'd like to add to that before we move on, please do.
Yeah, I that's the start of Nomia as a world, and it actually started off as like a sort of just drawing, maybe comic book kind of idea before I realized that I think the story was something that was really well expressed in a game. Like I think games are uniquely able to help us embody the characters that they're talking about. So I had been drawing these characters for a while. I've been drawing and imagining this what this world would look like of like people who are adventurers but who perform a role that is less violent than let's kill all the goblins or let's kill all the orcs or let's go raid some old tombs and that kind of stuff. And I realized that a game is sort of the perfect medium to help like meditate upon what it's like to be these people, to actually let the player embody what it's like to be somebody who thinks this way and what they how they fight that sort of informs a little bit about who they are as a person and how they think. So that I think ties into why I started to make Nomia, and just to enjoy the process of making a game and to be creative in many different ways.
I love that. I remember when we last spoke, I hadn't realized that it was initially meant to be a graphic novel, and we spoke
Mm.
about kind of this concept of in a game, you're an active participant, and there's a different level of empathy when you are an active participant and you are playing a character. So tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about the decision to make a game instead of moving forward with the original vision, which was to have it be a graphic novel.
Yeah, absolutely. I love comics, and I don't think my brain is wired to create them. I love bouncing between a lot of different disciplines. It tends to take me a while to draw things, actually. So creating a comic sort of I'm sort of lining up the points in my head, but my spouse and I once made a comic, or like we're drawing a comic, and it was really really fun. And I realized that I didn't have the capacity to keep like coloring pages or like thinking about the next panel, and we had very like different things that motivated us when creating. So I thought like if there's some theoretical world where I work forever and create this really cool graphic novel that tells the story, but would that actually be sustainable? Would I actually be able to find the motivation within myself to tell the story? Would I really be connected to it if I'm on page like 350 and thinking like, oh, my wrists are so sore. I've been drawing the same like people in the same poses over and over again? So then I realized like I could take my love for video games and tell the story in a different way. And the way I think of it is like everybody has the capacity to suspend their disbelief when it comes to consuming media and consuming stories. Like when we read a book, we don't think about like, are the graphics of this book good? We are able to envision the world in our head. And likewise with games and things that have like less representational or less I guess high fidelity graphics, we're generally able to imagine what's going on. Like if a game has like, still frames, we don't think in the world of the game that these characters are just standing still. We're
Mhm.
reading a visual novel and we think, okay, this emote here is sort of representing the mood of what's going on. But we can imagine that the characters are alive and that they're breathing and that they're tasking while they're in the scene. And I think with games, I realized that it helps to focus on like what are these characters doing and accomplishing in the plot. And if I were to determine the if I were to decide on a consistent visual style, I didn't actually have to render everything at super high fidelity in the same way that I think helps a graphic novel when you render everything at super high fidelity. So I guess what I'm thinking of is like in Slay the Spire, the animation is very limited, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean like it's very smartly done where each character just has a couple of frames of movement, and there's effects going around on the screen that represent what they're doing. And when you play Slay the Spire, you sort of get used to the visual style. We don't lament that when you use like bludgeon, the ironclad isn't like literally doing backflips and doing this really cool animation. And this isn't to say there's anything wrong with that. It's really cool when there is animation, but I think when the game establishes that it trusts you to imagine the cool thing that's happening because you're piloting this character, because you're the one sort of executing these maneuvers. Um, I think that helps with the suspension of disbelief. Slay the Spire didn't have to animate the attacks happening individually and didn't have to animate every single thing happening because you, as the player, realize that it took this effort to get there in the first place. You know, you as the player are the one putting in the effort to accomplish this really, really cool thing. And so the animation, the effects, the game feel are, in my view, sort of there to reward you for doing that and not to sort of take the first step of selling you that this really cool thing happened because you did the really cool thing. You were the one who put that into motion.
I like that a
Yeah,
lot.
thank
I
you.
like that a lot. Um, you had mentioned earlier something that I really wanted to chat about, which is this
Mm,
idea that fantasy helps us imagine what a better world might look like.
yes.
And I love that. And we had initially spoken about this the last time we chatted as well. Tell us a little
Mm.
bit more about that, I guess, narrative philosophy or game dev philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. So the narrative philosophy in NOMIA, so I guess I could describe the world building a little bit. Basically, I went through a checklist of like, what am I frustrated by modern fantasy and what can I do differently? I'm frustrated by the idea that death is cheap, like people die and are
Mm,
resurrected all the time. So one of the corners of the world building is that adventuring has a lot of like safety devices that people have invented over the years. You know, there's the concept of a tether where something that can pull you back to safety if needed. There's a type of grass that rewinds time if you apply it to a wound, so people can heal themselves if needed. There's the like every wizard carries a little band that can create shields around themselves or their partner if they're really skilled. And just thinking about how people wouldn't wander into danger willy-nilly. You know, I think that like in order to have a world where all sorts of people, even those who are maybe less like okay with danger, are able to do these cool adventuring things and express themselves in that way, there needs to be that sense of safety and that sense of community as well. You know, there's people sort of supporting you every step of the way. And I think the other corner of the world building is the sort of thoughtfulness around violence. Um, I am a little bit uncomfortable with the idea in fantasy that there's just this vague enemy somewhere that you can exert your cool choreography on and not have to worry about like the morality of that. You know, I think that the tension is I've been, you know, I did martial arts growing up, and I think there's something really cool about martial arts and how it's a way to touch something really ancient and a way to participate in a really ancient tradition. But I don't want to actually perform violence on anybody. You know, I don't want to actually harm anybody. And I think my way of letting people do cool martial arts stuff, and I include like wizards throwing lightning bolts in the choreography of that, without making it so that they're doing violence on people, is that what the adventurers do in this world is they dive into the past. There's a basically a lake that swallows everything that's been forgotten by the people, and that includes like old dangers or old like fears and old monsters that have appeared in the past. And they dive into the lake and are capable of retrieving things from it. So society in this world is in many ways supported by adventurers diving into the past and retrieving things back from it. Confronting the past to sustain the present is the tagline that I came up with. And so in many ways, I think the cool part of martial arts is challenging yourself. So in a way, what these adventurers are doing is challenging themselves and challenging the legacy that they've inherited. And they get to be cool without actually, you know, doing violence on another thinking living being. So yeah,
mm.
I think those are the two things that I wanted to touch on.
I love that. I also grew up doing martial arts, and I got chills when you said this is you're practicing something that is has survived centuries.
Mm,
And I like the idea of when you're practicing martial arts, you're really challenging yourself because it
yeah.
certainly felt that way
Oh
when I
goodness.
was doing martial arts. It's very
Yeah.
physically demanding. But I'm also very inspired by how thoughtfully you've thought through the world and the themes that you wanted to touch on. And I can only imagine you must have had a really big brainstorming document or book or something.
I would hope so. I my documents are I think they would be inscrutable to anyone else. You know how in like D&D they say how like a wizard's spell book can only be read by them because their method of notation is just completely incomprehensible to somebody who hasn't been there to do it. I definitely the notes that I've taken are not organized for an outside audience. You know, and I think that's part of the joy of creating too, that like in in a day job I tend to create a lot of things with the idea that somebody else will have to read them. So you know, and having to mask sometimes in like day-to-day conversation, there's a lot of accounting for what how somebody else will interpret this, accounting for how somebody else might take this and how to like onboard them onto a thought process that comes really naturally to me. And my notes for the game are sort of scattered around everywhere. I just have this like vibe in my brain, and I have the full story written out as bullet points. They're not all the dialogue is like fully implemented yet, but I just have this like arc that feels natural to for the characters to go on. Like I've these characters are sort of telling me where they would like the story to go. And that's a super long-winded answer for no, I don't have a lot of good notes for this. It's all scattered. It's all everywhere. But yeah, the world building comes in the form of a lot of like drawings that I've made or just like scribblings that I have and like deciding
Mm,
what's true, I think depends on what would be the most satisfying thing to be true in the work that I'm trying to make.
mm. I like that. I
Thank
also like that you touched on you let the characters tell you what comes next. Because
Mm,
last year we had a video game writer on who's also a narrative designer, and we spoke about that as a technique. When we were
mm,
talking about kind of dialogue writing and where a story goes, and she had said it is a technique that she learned in theater, which was you ask the
mm.
character to tell you what happens next, and you have a conversation with the character. And I thought that was really cool. So it's really cool to hear you talk about that as well.
Oh my goodness, I have to watch that episode. I also grew up a theater kid, and I think that's something that I want to stay true to as well. Like
Mm,
theater's so magical because it's all about being affected. Like it's all about
mm.
being true to where it is in the moment. And yeah, oh, theater's so cool.
Mm, mm. Love live theater. Um, while we're on the topic of storytelling,
Mm,
you had mentioned that Nomia is a game about duality. How do we hold duality and multitudes within ourselves? Because we do. Tell us a little
yes.
bit more about that narrative theme.
Yeah, well, I thank you for asking. Like, I think the duality of it comes within the seed of that started within my own experience, you know, like being a first generation immigrant, there's that duality of like, I come from a certain place and I've gone to a certain place. And it's not that I have to choose one or the other, it's that both of those are true for me and they express themselves contextually in different contexts. Being bisexual, it's kind of like that as well. It's like, I don't have to choose between one or the other. It's both of those exist and it expresses itself contextually and it's its own thing as well, you know. Like I think of duality as different from binary because when we hold those multitudes within ourselves, something new emerges from the interaction of the two.
Mm,
And that's a very, sorry, like it's a very big brain way to describe that. My game is sort of a mixture of different parts. You know, I think of the duality is very literally expressed in the fact that we have two characters that we're controlling rather than just the one, and they each have two parts of their hand rather than just the one. And the way that it comes into the story as well is that I wanted to give every character a sort of I don't want to say duality to them again, but a sort of pull and a sort of push. Like what are they running to and what are they running from? And that can come in the form of like I want to be excellent but I'm actually tired of trying so hard all the time, or I want to be curious and to answer the questions that I have but I'm scared that I don't deserve to be the one to know that, or I'm scared that I don't deserve to be the one to teach other people that sort of thing. And I think to stop speaking in super vague terms, like one of the characters, Hawk, is the one of the main characters' father, and he sort of embodies this. what does it mean for somebody to be a great hero to a lot of people, but not to be an ideal father to the one of the main characters? Like everybody really, really loves him, and he is genuinely a person who's helped out a lot of people, but he's not very present as a father figure to Butterfly, another one of the characters. And both of those things are true. It's not that him being not present makes him just an irredeemable, horrible person, and it's not that him helping out a lot of people makes him automatically a good father. It's like what's the phrase that I'm trying to put together? He's a person who loves to be admired, but only from a distance. He's a person
Mm.
who loves to perform, but gets tired if he has to be in a role all the time, like that of being a parent. And it's sort of embodying both of those sides in one person, and how, like, asking how would that look if this character were to be involved in a journey in a story that's somewhat about them.
Mm. I feel like we could just talk about this for 3 hours.
I suppose if so is good. No spoilers, but
Slight spoilers
slight
for the
spoilers
beginning of the game.
for the beginning of the game. Yes.
um, yeah, it's I really like how you put that. Because yeah, we all hold duality and we all hold multitudes, and it shows up in a lot of different ways.
Mm,
Um, but I'd like to switch gears
mm.
a little bit, if that's all right.
Of course, of course.
You also mentioned in your introduction that you are primarily a solo dev, uh,
Yes, yes.
meaning you kind of worked on most of it. You did hire a composer to compose music. Tell us a little bit about to make a game like this where you have so much responsibility. How do you make it sustainable? Because you also mentioned you have a
Yes.
day job. It takes a considerable amount of time to create any sort of game, let alone
Hmm.
something as complex as a roguelike that is narrative focused, where one has to be really mindful about what happens when. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that balance.
Yeah. Yes, you mentioned I have commissioned. Well, who's the person in chat who is like commissioned or hired? Commissioned. Yes, I've commissioned Will Goss to make the excellent music in the game. I have not chained him up to the music factory. He's his own free person. But yeah, being a solo dev, I think is largely a matter of finding motivation, and like keeping things sustainable in game dev, I think is motivation. There's a lot of really great talks about the technicality of making a game, like the process of making a game, and the how to, the actual steps of, and those are all wonderful talks. And I think something that is often less covered is we as human beings need motivation to do things. Like we're not machines that take in a set of instructions and output a set of art. I think the actual like thing that we're making. So for me, this is part of the pivot from making it from like an art, like world building / comic book project into a game, is that I realized something that motivates me is getting to work on all these different things, getting
Mm,
to wear all these different hats at a different time. Um, Part of the scattered documents that I have is a big to-do list of all the things that I want to get into the game. And I sort of organize them based on here's some visual changes, here's some audio side changes, here's some game design changes. And all of these threads sort of weave together, but they weave together in a way where if some days I don't feel like drawing, I can program. If some days I don't feel like programming, I can write. And if some days I don't feel like writing, then I can go back to drawing. And there's all sorts of things woven into there. I feel individually nourished by all of these things, and nourished at different times and motivated at different times by them. So I think the critical piece of that motivation and the sustainability of working as a solo dev is to really dial into what motivates you, not just in general, but in the very moment that you want to work on the game, and
mm,
to give yourself some runway to be able to like have tasks of that sort so that you're always making progress on the project. But
mm,
you are right, it is like very, very complex, and there's a lot going on, a lot of individual components. So, it's good to take breaks. It's good to take a step back from it, seek the feedback of others as well. Like I think part of the world building is that the adventures are never sent out alone, like because the dream responds to everyone's memories. If you go alone, it can become really unstable. Like a single person's mind is prone to spiraling sometimes. So you always have a friend there with you in order to not just to like stabilize, to back you up in a like a wizard and a warrior capacity, but to stabilize your own perception, to sort of like be a check against spiraling, to be a check against like spinning off into a big direction, or like into a tangent that you might not want to. And I think that applies to the creative process as well, where it's good to always see how other people are taking your work and um, to take that in, not necessarily to always like just do whatever the other person wants, but to take that in as a part of the creative process.
Mm. I have to say, the power of friendship is my favorite trope. Uh,
It's so good. It's very, very good.
it's so good, especially if it's done well and thoughtfully. And you have done that in Nomia
Thank
very
you.
well. But I also wanted to touch on the idea that because you have so many things that you're working on, that you have the freedom and the joy to decide when you sit down to work on something. Obviously, there's going to be priorities and deadlines and stuff like that, but it sounds like you
Mhm.
have a considerable amount of freedom in deciding, I feel like working on this today, I feel like working on this today. I'm very similar in my uh, professional development, I suppose. I freelance full time,
Mm.
so professional development falls on me to make sure that I'm constantly learning and
Mm.
spending time in engine and things like that. And I like to create a menu for myself to be like, what do I feel like
Mm.
learning today? What do I feel like practicing today? And
Yes.
yeah, I just have a little menu where it's like, unless something is very urgent, where I'm like, oh, I need to learn this for a specific project that I might be starting next month. Obviously, you prioritize those things, but I love the idea
Mhm.
of having a menu and being able to decide when you sit down because, to your point, it speaks to motivation, and then you're more
Yeah.
motivated and excited to work on something. So,
Yes, absolutely. That resonates a lot. The menu is such a great metaphor for that. And like when you mention things that are really high priority as well, I think there's often an opportunity to drill down into that and find little sub pieces of that that are motivating. Like maybe if I really need to get some like a programming task done or like a bug fix done, um, then okay, maybe I don't feel motivated to do a lot of like test writing today or to implement this kind of system, but I'm really motivated to tweak these numbers and make this like game part of the game feel better. So I'll do that to warm up my programming side of my brain before I dive into something else. Like there's even when you're working on like a specific part of it or a specific part of the menu, um, maybe there's one part of the salad that you really enjoy more than the rest of the salad
mhm.
and things like that to take the metaphor further.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely agreed. Um, Tell us a little bit. We're kind of teetering on this topic. I think this is a good segue, but tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about what has been the most challenging part of working on the game and what has been the most fun.
Mm. I want to be very thoughtful about that response. No, thank you for asking. I think
That
the
was
the
such an
most
absolute question. I'm so sorry. You
no, no,
can.
no, it's not your fault at all. It's not your fault at all. Yeah, it's just something I want to be thoughtful about because like one of the most fun parts of working on the game is getting to play the game, I think. Like I think it's a good sign when you're making a game and you still have fun playing the game, like I've been in some theater productions where I've been in a comedy where like we rehearse so much and we tell the jokes so much that it stops being funny by the time you perform it. And then there's this worry of like, oh goodness, is the audience actually going to enjoy this? Because I'm not laughing at the jokes that I've rehearsed a lot. But when the audience does laugh, it's a moment of relief. So when it comes on top of that, you're making a game and you're playing the game and you're still having fun with the game, and the game is able to surprise you. I think the roguelikes are really, really good for this when you design them in a way where surprising behavior emerges. When your own creation is able to surprise you a little bit, I think that's one of the most joyful parts of making a game. And like games are, I think, one of the only mediums where we're able to do that because the interaction and the actual experience is created through that interaction rather than as the will of the author. Um, and simultaneously, I think the tricky part or the difficult part is knowing that you're not the only person to experience it. Like your experience is unique with the game, and someone else's experience might not resonate with what you're experiencing, and they might approach things in a different way. So having to account for all of those different experiences, I think, is the most difficult part as only one person.
Mhm.
Um, that sort of dovetails into, I think, marketing and sort of just integrating feedback as well. I mentioned earlier that it's really good to get different eyes on your game and to see how people play. And part of that is because they might catch things that you took for granted that you didn't realize. Like if the tutorialization is a little bit unclear, you can have a lot of this brilliant design in your head, but if it's not communicated well to the player, they aren't able to access that. They aren't able to experience the same things that you're experiencing. And the players might reveal like something that they want that doesn't really like vibe with your vision, perhaps. And you have to decide how comfortable are you with alienating this part of the audience if it means being more true to your vision, you know? The toughest lesson that I think, in the process of learning is that marketing and creating are not really separate. Marketing technically goes all the way back to what kind of game are you making in the first place? You know, before I started this project, I had this thought in my head, like very starving artist, like I don't have to market my game. I just have to make a game that's just so perfect and so good, and then the people will want to play it so badly. But I don't think that's something that actually happens because I certainly haven't gone out of my way to be like, wow, this game is really good. I'm going to promote it and be the free marketing for it, you know? So, and marketing goes back to like is the player receiving the message that I'm sending them? Is the player like um being confused by a certain thing? Is the like in the context of what people are familiar with and like what sorts of work that they're used to, is there enough of a bridge between that and this sort of different, very strange vision that I'm trying to tell that they will understand, you know? I've been speaking for a while, so I'd like to pause here.
No, I love that. And there's so many different moving pieces to account for as well,
Hmm.
going back to what we were talking about, right? There's so many things in that, going back to the menu analogy,
Yeah.
that one might choose to spend their time on any given day,
Hmm.
unless there are priorities that need to be done at a certain point in time and deadlines have to be met. Um,
Yeah.
you mentioned kind of talking about your learnings, and there have been a lot.
Hmm.
As you have been developing the game, have any game dev philosophies surfaced up where you're like, you know what, this is one thing that I would like, that philosophically I would like to implement in my future projects? Maybe it's a particular process, maybe
Mm.
it's, I don't know, how you've tackled a particular problem. Maybe it's in how you're writing stories. I'm very curious if like any personal philosophies have come out of the process of creating Nomia.
Yeah, I think many, but I'm thinking of how to synthesize this in a good way. I think something that I want to keep underpinning my works in the future, not just games, but other things as well, is that the the creation happens in the interaction between the game and the player. Like, uh, I think I used to think that, you know, I would just be heads down creating this thing, and this thing would be so cool in a vacuum, and then somebody else would just experience this perfect creation that I have. But I think the truth of it is, and this is true for all art, but I think especially for games, is that the actual thing that it is created in the interface between the game and the player. Like me as a person, I only have a limited amount of control over the actual experience that somebody has because they get to interact with it. And so the philosophy that I want to carry is to be kind to that and
Mm,
to how should I say, I don't want to just say account for it, but to just like acknowledge that like I don't have full control over what's created. And I think that's a beautiful thing. You know, I think maybe what resonates with me in this whole world that I've created brings that something else in someone in a different person. And maybe that inspires them to create their own thing that resonates with them, you know? Like I think a concrete example of that is while I was developing the game, I sort of got this intuitive sense for what the enemies would do. You know, I implemented a preview system in that after you moved to a new place, there would be a bunch of lines drawn to say, okay, this enemy is coming in and going to do this move to one of your characters. And I wanted that to represent the fact that these characters are very experienced and they're very good at what they do, so they can sort of predict what these dream creatures are going to do to them. Um, but because I'd been developing the actual enemy behaviors, I realized that I had gotten this like intuitive sense for if I move here, this enemy is gonna do this. But I watched a streamer playing the game and realized that he did not have that intuition. So because he did not know whether if he moved to a certain place, the enemies would change their moves, he just did not move very often. He was very, very cautious. He was very like, I don't want to do this in case it screws up the plan that I've had. And I realized that that wasn't the message I wanted to deliver. Like these characters are not necessarily overly cautious. So that drove me to implement a system where before you move, you show what the enemies do. As soon as you pick up a move card and you're hovering over, like maybe this is where I want to move, it'll show you that if you move here, this enemy will change its intent to over here. And so that's something that I think completes the loop where because someone else's experience is something that they created themselves, I realized that I could take something from that and fold it back into the big batter of the game itself and hopefully create something that resonates even more.
Mm. I really appreciate that level of thoughtfulness, not only in the game design, but also in having empathy for the player, because yeah, there's no way to predict how something is going to land
Hmm.
on someone. We can come in with the best intentions of, oh, this is kind of the best way to teach this mechanic, but it may or may not land universally. And I really appreciate kind of the narrative thoughtfulness as well of like this mechanic is happening because the characters are experienced. And I
Thank
like kind of
you.
the level of detail that you went into there. I
I
think that's
appreciate that.
incredible.
Thank you. I think
Um,
there's something liberating about it too, of like
mm,
knowing that you can't control the exact experience that somebody has. It sort of frees you from like, oh goodness, I have to make sure that they have the perfect experience. It's okay if things are confusing for some people, but it's like very clear for others. As long as we're trying our best, it helps let go of perfection in that way.
mm. Going back to duality, this is how I think about if I'm writing music for a game. I
Mm,
very much keep in mind what is the emotional tone that we're trying to strike with the player. What would the player be feeling if they're listening to this melody?
mhm,
Um, but equally, kind of the flip side of that is music is extremely subjective. So
mhm,
we might be able
mhm,
to hit a particular emotional tone, and then there's the added layer of someone might enjoy that melody, let's keep it simple, or someone might not enjoy that. And that's kind of the
mhm.
duality of and vulnerability, I think, of making art is that it's really, really vulnerable.
Yeah, it
Um,
is so, so vulnerable. Not to make another side, but
no, please.
have you seen that Sideways video on the music in Coco?
No.
The video was sort of about how like one's taste in music is sort of defined at a very certain like period of a person's life. And so what resonates for somebody, what feels like this grand sweeping, like this is the music actually really driven by personal experience rather than some objective measure of like this is what cool
Mm,
music sounds like. Or we can think about how like I think a lot of people perceive jazz music as like this very classy, very like highbrow kind of thing, but jazz music when it originated was thought of as threatening, was thought of as like this upheaval to the social order. Like the context determines how we interpret art so much. I think to
mm,
your point, like it's very vulnerable in how subjective it is and how little we have control over what the person who's looking at our art, what their personal experience was leading up to this point.
mm-hmm. Oh, I'm gonna bother you for that later because I would love to
Mm,
watch it. And yes, fully agree. It That's so fascinating, actually, that people's musical tastes are shaped by certain moments in their lives.
yeah.
I'd be very interested to watch that. Switching gears a little bit, what advice now that you have? I mean, you have so much experience
Oh,
creating
shucks.
games and creating art. What advice would you have for developers who are just starting their game dev journey?
Mm. Developers who are just starting, I guess the number one thing that I would want to say is just try to stay attached to the joy of it. Well, not
Mm,
attached, but like try to stay connected to the joy of creating. Like we as game developers do something that is so inherently joyful, and we're creating something that is so inherently joyful that I think it would be tragic if we lost sight of it while we were creating. Um, in terms of the nitty-gritty, the details, like I think I'm a very certain kind of game developer where I'm not doing this for a living and I'm doing this for just like creative fulfillment. So I think the advice that I'm giving is coming from that perspective and may not necessarily apply to somebody who needs to navigate the more like business side of things or needs to navigate this as a career and as something that sustains them financially. But in in as much as I think it's good to be sustainable for yourself as a human being, like it's so important to stay connected to the joy of what you're creating and to really think like, why am I making this? And to really be connected to like what is the importance of what I'm saying? What is the like meaning of why I need to make this thing specifically and this thing in particular? So
Mm,
kind of nebulous. I could dive into specifics more, I
yes.
guess, but yeah.
No, I love if you'd like, please feel free to add to that because
Mm,
yeah, I think staying connected to the joy of creating anything
mm,
bleeds into whatever we create. And um I think people can see that. I think players can see that.
mm.
If a team had fun or if a solo developer had fun working on something, you
I
can
hope
see it
so.
in the details.
Yeah, I really do hope that that carries through. You know, this like making this game has been a big source of joy for me, and I hope that carries through in playing of it. Um, I guess the one thing I can think of to dive in deeper to that is that a gameplay mechanic is sort of a tool. I think a lot of like beginner game devs sort of think of like, okay, I'm going to make a platformer or I'm going to make a puzzle game. And it starts off with the genre of it, which is not necessarily a wrong way to think about it. I think it's a good anchor for if, especially if you have teammates to sort of anchor to what you're doing. Because genre, I think genre as a is basically a tool to set
Mm,
expectations. Like it's not what a thing is. It's something to help us talk about what it is. Um, but to not get too attached to individual things like genre or gameplay mechanics, and instead to take a step back and think, like, what am I trying to express? And then what is the best tool to help me express that? You know, like, it's, I can't think of a concrete example of this right now, but just like I've been on projects where like I'm so locked into, okay, this is a platformer, this is an
mm,
action platformer, this is this. And I think if I had taken a step back, I would have realized like, oh, maybe what I'm actually trying to make is a very story heavy game. Like maybe what I'm actually trying to make is not something where you rack up millions and millions of points, but you're going through a character's journey, you know, and then once you realize that thought, like what can we change? Maybe we de-emphasize the like super deep combat systems or like de-emphasize the parts of the combat systems that involve like getting a triple S ranking in Devil May Cry and getting like millions and millions of red orbs. And more emphasize like what can we do to make these characters' moves express something about who they are as a person, how they fight, how they think, and how they embody themselves in this world. You know, little like thinking from the roots, things like
mm,
that. I think that's
mhm.
been really helpful in the game dev for me.
I like that. And that also touches on the fact that we don't have unlimited time as well, and we have to
Yeah.
prioritize due to the fact that we don't have unlimited time. So yeah,
Hmm.
I like that kind of putting focus on letting the art be letting the art evolve as you're creating it and de-emphasizing things as it's brought to life and
Hmm.
emphasizing other things as it's brought to life because I don't know if you agree with this, but I feel like anytime we create something, it changes us as well.
Yeah.
And in the process of creating, we are changed and we learn. And so I really like the advice of if something needs to be de-emphasized, let's de-emphasize it in favor of whatever might be coming out that'll resonate more.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And like especially in the medium that you work with like music and audio, it's such a like an emotionally charged medium. Like it would be strange if we weren't affected by it, you know? Like with games, there's a process of creating and a process of letting go.
Mm,
And earlier in my journey of making games, I think I was really loath to let go of things. You know, I if I came up with an idea, then it'd be like, okay, what's the coolest way I can implement this idea? But like, there's I think there's a need to find a certain peace in letting go of things, not just in terms of the player's experience is not something I can directly control, but also like maybe you have an idea and it's just that. It's just a good idea that you had. It's not something that would be feasible or maybe even good to put in the game, but it's satisfying just to have the idea and to let it go and to just be at peace with that too.
mm-hmm. Yep, agreed. Going into our final question.
Mm,
I love ending on this because so many beautiful stories come up. But if you could give your younger self advice, and you can decide which version of younger you're giving this advice to,
mm.
if you could give your younger self any advice, what would it be?
Ooh, lots of advice. Um,
Same.
I know, right? We learn. It turns out we learn a lot as we experience this weird thing called life. Um, but I think the one that's coming to the top of mind right now is the nuance of it's okay to be a lot of different things. Um, I could think myself as a younger in my teenage years, I should say, there's a lot of pressure to specialize. There's a lot of pressure to be like, okay, you've done all your exploration. You were somehow simultaneously a nerd and a jock and a theater kid in high school. Now it's time to pick one of your lanes and just determine the course of your entire life at the ripe old age of 17, you know? There's a lot of pressure to specialize, and I think that continues as into adulthood, where we're sort of defined by our career, defined by what we do 9 to 5, or defined by like the one thing that is our own elevator pitch as a person. But I think the advice I'd want to give to my younger self is the nuance of yes, that's something we need to do right now to navigate society and to navigate the structures that we find ourselves in, but that's not the actual truth of who you have to be as a person. It's okay to carry all of those multitudes within yourself, and it's okay to like keep all of those parts of yourself alive while acknowledging that maybe one of them has to take up more time or take up more space in order to sustain you in the world that we live in, you know. But none of those parts of you are fake. None of those parts of you are less true than any of the other parts. And I think that's beautiful that we as people can get to nurture and foster all those parts, even if they have to, maybe lay dormant for a while, or to take time where they can to express themselves.
That's beautiful advice. Could you give younger me
Thank
a
you.
call too and tell her that?
We'll do a duo FF14 stream for younger Marina and be
Perfect.
like, hey, look,
Perfect.
the free trial goes all the way to Stormblood this time.
Hey, start playing this game sooner than you did. That's the
hmm
advice.
hmm You'll catch up. You'll be an Omni crafter by the time it comes out. You'll make tons and tons of gil
Exactly.
on the market board.
Exactly. That's it. It's funny you say that because I've just gotten really into crafting. So
Oh my good. It's so meditative.
it's
It's
good.
it's
It's really
nice.
good. It
Oh my
really
goodness.
is. Tangleworm, thank you so much. That's all the time that we have for our
Thank you so
recording
much for hosting.
today.
My goodness.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for
It's been
such
an absolute pleasure.
thank you for such beautiful and thoughtful answers, and for sharing your story. And for everyone who's here watching the recording, thank you so much for watching. As always, our socials will be in the description if you'd like to follow us, if you'd like to check out Nomia, and if you have any feedback or topics you'd like to see covered in the future, give us a shout. Thank you again.
Thanks so
Shall
much for
we
having
open it
me.
up? Shall we open up for Q&A?
I'd love that.
Let's do it. We'll say bye to the recording.
See
Bye.
ya.